You know the moment. Someone asks, "Do you need help with that?" And before your brain even processes the offer, your mouth has already said, "No, I'm good." You didn't decide that. Something decided it for you, faster than thought, faster than honesty. And you've built an entire identity on top of that reflex, calling it independence, calling it strength, calling it just who you are. It isn't who you are, it's who you were trained to become, and there's a difference between the two that most people never get to see because the training was so early and so consistent it now feels like personality. Everyone tells you asking for help is a sign of strength. You've heard that 100 times, and it has never once changed your behavior. Not once. If a truth doesn't change your behavior after the 100th repetition, it's not the truth you're dealing with. It's a slogan sitting on top of a wound the slogan was never designed to reach. Forget the slogan. We're going lower, somewhere encouragement never touches, because encouragement was never the problem. The problem is architecture. Architecture doesn't respond to encouragement. It responds to pressure and pattern. That's what built it. That's what has to unbuild it. People who never ask for help are not strong. Sit with that for a second, because it will feel like an attack, and it isn't. It's a diagnosis. What they actually are is people running a very old threat response, installed so early it now masquerades as character. And underneath it is something almost nobody says out loud. They don't trust that help, if given, would come without a cost. Somewhere, early, they learned that needing something from another person came with interest payments, gratitude, compliance, never bringing it up again, pretending the need never existed. Here's the part I'm leaving open for now. There is one specific moment, almost universal in people like this, where the pattern doesn't get installed by cruelty, it gets installed by kindness, a very particular kind of kindness. I'll come back to that. Hold the tension. First, the mechanism, because you can't dismantle what you can't see the shape of. The brain doesn't process needing help as neutral, it processes it as a status transaction. Every time you ask someone for something, your nervous system runs a silent calculation. What does this cost me in perceived competence, perceived control, perceived worth in this relationship? That calculation happens below language, in the same ancient circuitry that once calculated whether the tribe would still feed you if you couldn't hunt. Your chest tightening before you ask a coworker to cover a shift isn't drama. It's a 50,000-year-old audit with modern stakes bolted on. Now the specific part, the part that's probably a little too accurate. Picture the kid constantly praised for being so mature for their age. Picture the kid taught through 1,000 small withdrawals of warmth that their needs were an inconvenience to a household already stretched thin, not abandoned, not abused, just quietly taught that competence was the price of belonging. That kid learns arithmetic nobody writes on a whiteboard. My needs cost people something, so the safest way to stay loved is to never generate the invoice. They get unnervingly good at solving things alone in the dark, at looking composed while negotiating with a panic they've never told anyone about. They manage a crisis at work with a flat voice, then fall apart in their car afterward, alone, because falling apart in front of someone was never modeled as safe. It was modeled as a burden with a bill attached. That's the moment I told you to hold on to, not trauma in the loud sense, kindness with strings. Warmth conditional on self-sufficiency. That's the install. It's so wrapped in love that the person carrying it will defend the household that installed it because nothing bad happened to them. Nothing bad happened. Something necessary just never happened either. An absence doesn't announce itself. It leaves a shape where a skill should be. Here's where the self-help culture gets it wrong, and this is the actual reframe. You've been told the goal is to become more self-sufficient. Congratulations, you already did that. Too well. Self-sufficiency was never the missing skill. It's the symptom. The missing skill is one almost nobody names. Tolerating the vulnerability of being witnessed in need without collapsing your identity around it. That's a different muscle than independence, and you've never trained it because you've spent decades training its opposite with religious discipline. This is where the system that raised you and the system surrounding you now, even without ever meeting, start working together. An economy of individual optimization loves a person who never asks for anything, because that person becomes a closed loop, consuming content, consuming self-improvement products, consuming the illusion of progress without ever creating a demand on another human being's time. You are, without knowing it, the ideal customer for an entire industry convincing you that you can fix this alone if you just buy the right course, follow the right routine. Nobody in that industry profits from you calling a friend at 11 at night and saying, "I'm not okay." That doesn't scale, so it never gets suggested with the seriousness it deserves, even though it might be the most effective intervention available to you, free and structurally ignored. The real cost of this pattern isn't loneliness, though that's real too. The core cost is decision distortion. Refuse help long enough and you stop making decisions based on what's true. You start making decisions based on what can be handled without exposure. You'll choose the harder, slower, more exhausting path every time if the easier path requires being seen needing something. You'll stay in a job 2 years too long because leaving requires asking someone for a reference. You'll move apartments alone and wreck your back because asking 3 friends for 2 hours feels like debt you can't repay. Your entire life gets shaped by an avoidance you've never once looked at directly, because looking at it means admitting the exhausting standard you hold yourself to was never actually about strength. Refusing help isn't neutral either. It actively teaches people how to treat you. When you never ask, you train your environment to never offer or to assume you don't need it, and then you privately resent the very people you spent years training not to notice you. You build the cage and then feel abandoned inside it, and both are true at once, and neither cancels the other. Before we go further, subscribe if you want the next installment of this, because we're going to keep dismantling the architecture of psychological conditioning piece by piece, and this channel exists for people done being managed by patterns they never consciously agreed to. And while you're here, comment one specific thing, the exact memory where you learned that needing something from someone else came with a cost. Not the general idea, the actual memory. Naming it in text does something different than thinking it privately. It turns a felt sense into language, and language is the first place a pattern becomes something you can work on instead of something that just runs you.
Now, the actual reprogramming, because insight without mechanism is just a more articulate way of staying stuck. The nervous system that flinches at asking for help doesn't respond to logic. You already know, logically, that asking for help is fine. That knowledge has sat inert in your head for years, because this pattern doesn't live in logic, it lives in threat detection. And threat detection only updates through repeated survivable exposure. So manufacture small, low-stakes asks deliberately, on a schedule. Not when you desperately need something, but when you don't. Ask a coworker to grab you a coffee when they're already going. Ask a friend to help carry something you could technically carry alone. The content doesn't matter. What matters is your nervous system logging a data point. I asked, I was witnessed in mild need, and nothing collapsed. Do this enough times and you're not affirming a belief, you're retraining a threat response the way exposure therapy retrains a phobia, through evidence, not persuasion. The second mechanism is language level, and it's surgical. Every time you feel the reflex to say, "I'm fine, I've got it," insert a half-second pause before you answer. That pause is the entire intervention. The old pattern runs on speed. It answers before you can consciously intervene, because that's what a conditioned reflex is built to do. The pause breaks the automation. In that half-second, ask silently, is this actually true or is this the training talking? You don't have to change your answer every time. You just have to make the reflex pass through consciousness instead of bypassing it. A pattern that has to ask permission to run is no longer running you, you're running it. The third mechanism rewires identity rather than just behavior. Consciously separate competence from isolation. Competence is real. You can be extremely capable and still call someone. Those two facts have been fused in your mind so long they feel like one trait, but they were never the same thing. Capability is what you can do. Isolation is a decision about who gets to witness you doing it. See them as two separate dials instead of one, and you can turn one up and the other down independently, and that distinction alone quietly dissolves most of this pattern. What you're left with isn't dependency. Nobody's asking you to become someone who can't function alone. You're left with something almost nobody gets because they never dismantled the wall in the first place. The ability to choose isolation on the rare occasions it actually serves you, instead of defaulting to it every time out, of a fear you were never allowed to name. That was never weakness. It was a system installed early, reinforced by a culture that profits from your silence. And now you can see the blueprint of the maze instead of just feeling its walls. You're not broken. You were engineered. And engineering, unlike character, can be rebuilt.